A poor girl agreed to give the mafia boss a child, but he ended up falling in love with her. If you are not yet subscribed, know that you are welcome. This home is yours too. And to everyone from the heart, I ask, leave a like and share a comment. A simple hello, a note of where you're listening from, even a single word, all of it strengthens the flame that binds us together. The hospital smelled like bleach and endings. I learned to hold my breath on the walk to my grandmother's room, to time the inhale with the slow rise of her chest. You work too much, meu amor, she whispered, a papery smile tugging at lips the color of tea. I lied like I always did. I'm fine, Vo. I wasn't. The numbers on the bill had teeth. By the time I reached our building, the city had turned to a bruise. Violet sky, yellow windows, sirens fading into the dark like reluctant confessions. Paint peeled from the stairwell in curls. Our door stuck in the frame the way my future stuck in my throat. I jimmied it open and stood a moment in the smallness of home. One lamp, 2 mugs, the damp blanket that always smelled faintly of detergent, never fully rinsed out. Survival had a scent. It wasn't pretty. I'd just kicked off my shoes when they knocked. Not the landlord's frantic drum, a measured, polite sound that respected itself more than it respected me. I opened the door to 2 men in black, suits that fit, eyes that didn't blink enough. One was taller, the other carried a half smile as if we both knew I didn't have time for this and he didn't care. "Señorita Laura?" the tall one asked, and it wasn't a question, just an arrangement of syllables with my name inside. I nodded because fear collapses grammar. "What do you want?" "The boss would like a word," the smile said, handing me a white card with a single address and an hour printed on it, 9 p.m. I checked the cracked screen of my phone, 8:42. "I have to, my grandmother." "Transportation is provided," the tall one murmured, stepping aside to reveal a black car idling like a promise. I should have slammed the door, called the police, called anyone, but the bills were loud and the card was heavy in my hand. Desperation is a flu. It keeps you moving when you should be in bed. The car swallowed me whole. Leather, cold air, the faint thump of bass from a nightclub we passed. City lights smeared across the window as though the world couldn't decide what it was. We climbed a hill I'd only ever seen from the bus, and the house at the top watched the city like a predator who'd already eaten. Inside, marble that made sound feel small, mirrors that multiplied the men with guns posted like sculptures, a hallway long enough to reconsider my choices 3 times. They left me at a door of dark wood. It opened before I could knock. The room smelled of tobacco and power. He sat behind a desk big enough to land a plane, rings flashing when he gestured to the chair opposite. He was older than I expected, hair gone to frost at the edges, tan like old leather. The eyes were the dangerous part, kind when still, cruel when thinking. "Laura," he said, my name a verdict. "I am Alberto." The title he didn't say pressed down on the room until even the air obeyed. I sat because defiance is cheaper than medicine and my grandmother needed the latter. "You know who I am," he went on, voice smooth as cashmere. "You also know I can fix things that other people cannot." "I don't need things fixed," I lied, and he allowed himself the smallest smile, like I'd told a joke he'd heard 100 times. "The hospital," he said, as if it were a pet that sometimes forgot its place. "Your grandmother, the specialists, the private room, the comfort she deserves in her remaining years." He steepled his fingers. "All covered." The room tilted. I gripped the arms of the chair until the upholstery bit crescent moons into my palms. "At what price?" Alberto inclined his head, a priest about to perform a sacrament. "Marriage and a child." I thought I hadn't heard him right. The city outside blinked. The clock swallowed a second. I don't understand. My son will take over soon. Tradition requires an heir born within wedlock. I prefer a wife who understands duty, discretion, family. You tick the boxes. He said it like I was a form he'd filled in pencil. Heat crawled up my neck. "You want me to marry a stranger and have his baby so my grandmother can die comfortably? So she can live as long as fate allows with dignity. Words matter." He leaned back, watching me absorb the impact. "You will be protected, provided for. You will not be hurt as long as you respect the rules." Rules. The words snagged. "And if I say no?" He didn't sigh. Men like him don't waste air on disappointment. Refusing a lifeline is a choice. It has consequences. He let the last word drift to the desk like ash. "Consider, but not for long. Time, in these matters, is unkind." "What about your son?" I asked, voice thinned to a wire. "Does he know you're bargaining his life like cattle?" Alberto's eyes warmed a fraction, the way sunlight pretends kindness before it burns. Bernardo understands the weight of our name. He will do what is required, as will you. He rose, the meeting done, and set a fountain pen atop a folder with my surname printed cleanly along the edge. A contract slept inside it. I could feel its breath. You have until tomorrow at noon, he said. I have already transferred your grandmother to a better room. She is comfortable. Rage is hot and useless. It ran through me anyway. You moved her without asking me? I am asking you now, he said, and the softness in his tone scared me more than the threats he hadn't made. The hallway back felt colder, longer. The men with guns were still sculptures. Outside, the city spread below like a sea made of lights and debt. In the car, I pressed my forehead to the glass to keep my thoughts from boiling over. When we stopped at my building, the driver didn't look at me. He didn't have to. Men like him are mirrors that show you what you're willing to do. Upstairs, I stood in the doorway of our apartment and listened to the silence we had built, with secondhand furniture and first-hand worry. I went to the sink, turned on the tap, and watched water run until it cleared. It's a trick my grandmother taught me. Let the dirty go before you take what you need. He wanted my body as vessel, my name as ornament, my future as collateral. He wanted obedience dressed as gratitude. But he'd underestimated one thing. I know how to survive. I dried my hands, sat at the table, spread the white card flat, and traced the embossed letters with a fingernail until my skin ached. The choice wasn't a choice. Not really. Not when love wears hospital bands. I'll save you, Vo. I whispered to the room, to the city, to the man on the hill who thought hearts were ledgers. Even if I have to walk into the lion's mouth, somewhere across that glittering darkness, the sun I'd be chained to slept, unaware a stranger had been measured and weighed to fit his life. Tomorrow he would learn my name, and I would learn the rules.
My father didn't ask me to sit. He never does. When Don Alberto summons, you stand until he's satisfied with your posture, your silence, your obedience. Tonight, he poured 2 glasses of brandy and kept one. That told me everything. This was not an invitation. It was a verdict. Bernardo, he began, and the weight of my name felt less like family, more like iron. The time has come. I kept my hands behind my back. For what exactly? For you to do your duty, to secure our bloodline, to put an end to whispers. He studied me as though calculating my weaknesses, and he already knew where to press. I said nothing. Words were weapons, but silence, in this house, was survival. Finally, he placed a folder on the desk between us. My name etched in gold at the corner, a contract inside. She is called Laura, he said. You will marry her. She will bear your child, an heir born under our name. The doctors will care for her grandmother in return. Simple. I let the words hang. The fire cracked in the hearth. My pulse drummed in my ears, louder than the flames. You arranged this without me. Correction. His eyes narrowed. I arranged this for you, for us. Without heirs, power bleeds. Men begin to look elsewhere for strength. Do you want them to look past you? The familiar pressure coiled in my chest. The cage I had grown up in, lined with velvet and blood. So, I'm livestock now, a stud for the family legacy. Don Alberto smiled as though I'd flattered him. Don't be dramatic. You'll thank me one. Tradition is not a leash, Bernardo. It is armor. Armor. I thought of the scalpel in my hand once upon a time, of clean white coats and futures built on saving lives, before my brother died, before obligation tightened its noose. My father had taken that dream, gutted it, and handed me a throne I never wanted. Now he wanted to bind me to a stranger. I don't even know this woman. You will. He sipped his brandy, savoring the victory he had already claimed. She is discreet. She is desperate. Qualities that make for loyalty. I almost laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that would have drawn blood if laughter could cut. You think desperation breeds loyalty? It breeds survival. And survivors bite. He set his glass down hard enough to ring against the desk. Do not test me. I pulled her out of the gutter. She will obey, and you will perform your duty. End of discussion. I stepped closer, leaning into his shadow because mine had never been enough. And if I refuse? His expression didn't shift, but the air did. Heavy, cold. Refusal is not in your vocabulary. You carry my name. You will do this, or I will make sure every person who depends on you suffers. The girl, her grandmother, even your friends who still think you are a doctor in secret. You think they are invisible. Rage burned in my throat, but I swallowed it like glass. I knew the truth. No one escaped his reach. He slid the contract forward. The wedding is arranged. Tomorrow, you will meet her. Tonight, you will remember that family is duty, not desire. My fists clenched, nails biting into my palms. For a second, I saw myself refusing, tearing the contract, walking away. But the image collapsed as quickly as it came. Chains are chains, even when they glitter. I left the study without a word. The guards in the corridor stiffened as I passed. but I ignored them. Upstairs, my room was a mausoleum of trophies I hadn't earned. Portraits, medals, echoes of victories that weren't mine. I loosened my collar and poured my own. A stranger, Laura. She had a name now. My father's newest acquisition. My future wife. I tried to picture her face and failed. All I could see was the scalpel I once held. Sharp, clean, honest. I had traded it for brandy and bullets. Now for a bride. I downed the drink. The fire inside me no match for the fire in my veins. My father thought but he had underestimated one thing. I may walk into this marriage, but I would do it on my term. She may be his pawn, but she would see quickly. I am no one's weapon, not even his. Not anymore.
Pedro's knock was softer than usual, hesitant, as if even he could feel the storm behind my door. I almost didn't open, but his voice came through the thin wood, low and worried. "Laura, it's me." I let him in. Our apartment seemed smaller with him inside, his broad shoulders brushing against peeling paint, his blue eyes searching my face as though answers might already be written there. "You've been distant," he said, reaching for my hands. His were warm, calloused, familiar. They should have grounded me. Instead, they reminded me of everything I was about to lose. I pulled away before the truth spilled without permission. "I've just been tired." "Tired?" He stepped closer. "Laura, you look like you haven't slept in days. What's going on?" The silence between us stretched. Outside, a dog barked. A siren wailed. The city reminded me it was always listening. Finally, I exhaled, the words tearing free. "I had a meeting yesterday. With him." Pedro stiffened. He didn't need a name. In our neighborhood, the boss didn't need one. What did he want? His voice dropped, hushed, but edged with fear. My throat ached. He made an offer, a contract. He'll pay for my grandmother's treatment, every hospital bill, every medicine. Pedro's face softened for a fraction of a second, hope flickering, before he saw the way my shoulders shook. "What's the price?" I couldn't look at him. My nails dug crescents into my palms. "Marriage, to his son." The silence turned brutal. Pedro's jaw tightened, his breath coming out sharp. "Marriage?" He almost laughed, but it was broken, hollow. "Laura, that's slavery." "I know," I whispered. "But my grandmother, she doesn't have time. The doctors said the next months will be—" My voice cracked. I pressed a hand to my eyes. "I can't let her die like this. I can't." Pedro reached for me again, this time gripping my shoulders, forcing me to meet his eyes. They were wet, but blazing. "So you're willing to throw away your life, your freedom? Us?" The last word sliced deepest. "Us. I don't want to," I choked. "But what choice do I have? Tell me, Pedro. How else do I pay? How else do I save her?" "We'll find a way," he said quickly, desperately. "I'll work double shifts. I'll borrow from who?" My voice rose. "The same men who own this city? You think they'll treat us kinder outside the contract? At least this way she lives. At least this way." My words collapsed into tears. Pedro pulled me against his chest. For a moment, I let myself drown in the warmth, in the smell of soap and rain that clung to his shirt. A reminder of a different life, one that could have been ours. But even wrapped in his arms, I saw my grandmother's fragile frame, heard her cough rattling like dry leaves, imagined the cold steel of a hospital bed without medicine to soften it. When Pedro finally spoke, his voice trembled. "I love you, Laura, more than anything, but this is selling yourself to the devil." I wanted to argue, to promise him I'd find another way. Instead, I whispered the truth that had poisoned my tongue all night. "I've already decided." He flinched as though struck. Slowly, he released me, his hands falling to his sides like broken wings. "You're really going to do it. For her?" I said. "Not for me. Never for me." His eyes shone with unshed tears. "And what about us?" I couldn't answer. The silence screamed for me. Pedro turned away, pacing to the window, gripping the frame as if it could hold him together. "I can't stop you," he said finally. "But understand this, Laura. If you go through with it, nothing will ever be the same. Not for you. Not for me." I stared at his back, memorizing the shape of the man I loved, the man I was about to lose. And I hated Don Alberto for forcing me into this corner. I hated myself more for stepping into it willingly. When Pedro left, the door closing like a coffin lid, the apartment sank into silence again. I sat at the table, staring at the white card I'd left there, its letters pressed deep into the paper like a brand. Tomorrow at noon I would answer. But in my heart, the decision was already signed in my grandmother's fragile breath.
The chapel smelled of lilies and dust. the kind of flowers chosen by men who mistake beauty for decoration. My father stood near the altar, spine like a sword, hands clasped as though he were the priest instead of the executioner. The bride was late by 3 minutes. Not that I was counting, not that I cared. When she finally entered, my first thought was that she looked fragile enough to break. Pale skin, green eyes too large for her face, a simple dress that whispered poverty despite its clean lines. But there was something else too. Her chin held a stubborn tilt, as if she'd walked through hell to stand here and dared anyone to push her back. Laura. Her name sat heavy in my mouth though I hadn't spoken it. We didn't exchange a single look as she approached. My father's presence consumed everything, pressing me into silence, forcing her into a... He had orchestrated this union with the precision of a general. For him, this was not marriage. It was strategy. The priest droned words that meant nothing. Vows turned into contracts, rings into shackles. I repeated what I was told, voice flat, detached. Laura did the same, her tone brittle but clear. When it came time to kiss the bride, I extended my hand instead. A handshake, firm and cool, sealing the transaction. Her fingers trembled for the briefest second before stiffening. Survival instinct. I almost admired it. Applause rose. Quiet, restrained. Only the inner circle was here. Lieutenants, enforcers, women draped in jewels and secrets. No friends, no family on her side. My father preferred it this way. Less sentiment, less weakness. After the ceremony, he leaned in, murmuring low enough for only me to hear. Well done, Filho. Now we move forward. His hand clamped my shoulder like a man patting down a possession. I pulled away. Laura and I were ushered into the waiting car. The leather seats smelled of money and confinement. She sat stiff beside me, eyes fixed on the window, watching the city blur past. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. I recognized the gesture. Restraint. You don't have to be afraid, I said finally, surprising even myself. My voice came out rougher than I intended. She turned her head, her gaze sharp. I'm not afraid. I'm resigned. The honesty in it stung. I had no reply. The mansion loomed soon after, its iron gates yawning open like the jaws of something ancient. She exhaled when she saw it, soft but audible, a sound halfway between awe and dread. Inside, servants waited with lowered eyes. The corridors stretched endlessly, lined with portraits of ancestors glaring down, as if daring us to dishonor them. I guided her to her new quarters, the room adjacent to mine, not inside. My father's orders had been clear. Proximity without intimacy, duty before desire. She paused at the threshold, clutching the strap of her modest bag. So this is it? This is it. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say more, to ask something. But instead, she stepped inside, back straight, eyes forward. Like me, she knew resistance was wasted breath, for now. Later that night, I stood by my window watching the city glitter below and thought of the woman in the next room, forced into this union, just like we were both prisoners, but only one of us had chosen the cage.
The chapel smelled of lilies and dust, the kind of flowers chosen by men who mistake beauty for decoration. My father stood near the altar, spine like a sword, hands clasped as though he were the priest instead of the executioner. The bride was late by 3 minutes. Not that I was counting, not that I cared. When she finally entered, my first thought was that she looked fragile enough to break. Pale skin, green eyes too large for her face, a simple dress that whispered poverty despite its clean lines. But there was something else too. Her chin held a stubborn tilt, as if she'd walked through hell to stand here and dared anyone to push her back. Laura. Her name sat heavy in my mouth, though I hadn't spoken it yet. We didn't exchange a single look as she approached. My father's presence consumed everything, pressing me into silence, forcing her into obedience. He had orchestrated this union with the precision of a general. For him, this was not marriage. It was strategy. The priest droned words that meant nothing. Vows turned into contracts, rings into shackles. I repeated what I was told, voice flat, detached. Laura did the same, her tone brittle but clear. When it came time to kiss the bride, I extended my hand instead. A handshake, firm and cool, sealing the transaction. Her fingers trembled for the briefest second before stiffening. Survival instinct. I almost admired it. Applause rose, quiet, restrained. Only the inner circle was here. Lieutenants, enforcers, women draped in jewels and secrets. No friends, no family on her side. My father preferred it this way. Less sentiment, less weakness. After the ceremony, he leaned in, murmuring low enough for only me to hear. Well done, Filho. Now we move forward. His hand clamped my shoulder like a man patting down a possession. I pulled away. Laura and I were ushered into the waiting car. The leather seats smelled of money and confinement. She sat stiff beside me, eyes fixed on the window, watching the city blur past. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. I recognized the gesture. Restraint. You don't have to be afraid, I said finally, surprising even myself. My voice came out rougher than I intended. She turned her head, her gaze sharp. I'm not afraid. I'm resigned. The honesty in it stung. I had no reply. The mansion loomed soon after, its iron gates yawning open like the jaws of something ancient. She exhaled when she saw it, soft but audible, a sound halfway between awe and dread. Inside, servants waited with lowered eyes. The corridors stretched endlessly, lined with portraits of ancestors glaring down, as if daring us to dishonor them. I guided her to her new quarters, the room adjacent to mine, not inside. My father's orders had been clear: proximity without intimacy, duty before desire. She paused at the threshold, clutching the strap of her modest bag. So this is it? This is it, I confirmed. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say more, to ask something, but instead, she stepped inside, back straight, eyes forward. Like me, she knew resistance was wasted breath, for now. Later that night, I stood by my window, watching the city glitter below, and thought of the woman in the next room, forced into this union, just like me. We were both prisoners, but only one of us had chosen the cage.
The house was quieter though I couldn't explain why. Laura moved softly, like someone who had learned not to take up space, and yet every corridor she passed through seemed to shift with her presence. I told myself I didn't care, that she was just a contract sealed with my father's iron hand, that her green eyes and stubborn chin meant nothing, but I watched her anyway. From the balcony outside my study, I saw her cross the garden in the afternoon, barefoot in the grass, a small clay pot in her hands. One of the servants had given her a half-wilted plant, probably meant for disposal. She crouched down and began to trim the brown leaves, her lips moving in a whisper I couldn't hear, talking to it, encouraging it to. Ridiculous, and yet I couldn't look away. It struck me. She had no jewels, no power, no weapon, but persistent. And still, there was strength in the way she pressed her hands into the soil, unafraid of dirt under her nails. Most women in this world flinched at shadows. She faced them like an inevitability and kept going. I should have turned back inside. Instead, I stood there too long, until the image of her fingers coaxing life from decay imprinted itself behind my eyes. That night at dinner, she barely touched the food. My father's men sat at the long table, voices low, trading coded remarks about shipments and debts. Laura remained silent, back straight, eyes lowered. But I noticed the way her fork trembled slightly when Don Alberto's gaze lingered on her too long. Afterward, she excused herself quickly, disappearing into her wing of the house. I stayed behind, sipping whiskey, pretending indifferent. But when the silence settled again, I realized what unsettled me most. I wanted to hear her voice. I told myself it was curiosity, that I needed to measure her resilience, gauge whether she would be liability or asset. But there was another truth I refused to touch, the kind that could unravel everything I'd built from stone. Later, when I finally forced myself to sleep, I dreamt of her hands in the garden, coaxing green from rot, and I woke with the sharp taste of envy, because she still believed she could save things, and I hadn't believed that in a very long time.
The hospital didn't look like the place I had known. No peeling paint, no sour stench of antiseptic mixed with sweat. This wing gleamed. White walls, polished floors, nurses who spoke softly as if mercy had finally been invented. My grandmother's bed was draped in crisp linen, the monitors humming with steady reassurance. Her eyes lit when she saw me. "My Menina," she whispered, fragile hand reaching for mine. I bent to kiss her cheek, breathing in the scent of lavender soap. For the first time in months, she looked comfortable, almost peaceful. I should have felt relief. Instead, guilt clawed at my ribs. This comfort had been purchased with vows I didn't want, promises I couldn't keep to myself. "You've been sleeping better?" I asked. She nodded faintly. "The nurses are kind. The room, it feels like a blessing." Her gaze sharpened. "And you? Are they treating you well?" I lied with a smile. "Yes, Vo. Everything is fine." The lie cracked when the door opened. She walked in as if she owned the place. Tall, raven-haired, lips painted the color of ripe cherries. Her heels clicked across the tile, each step deliberate. She didn't look at my grandmother, not once. Her eyes found me instantly, sharp and assessing, and her smile curved slow, predatory. "You must be Laura," she said, voice velvet wrapped around glass. "I'm Camilla." The name dropped heavy between us. I didn't need anyone to explain who she was. I straightened in my chair, gripping my grandmother's hand. "Nice to meet you." Her gaze flicked down my simple dress, my scuffed shoes. Judgment dripped from her glance like perfume. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "He has particular tastes, you know. Hard to satisfy. But don't worry, he always comes back to what he knows. A chill swept my spine. I forced myself not to flinch. Then perhaps he'll surprise you. Camilla's smile widened. All teeth now. Perhaps. She touched the bed rail with manicured nails, finally acknowledging my grandmother with a quick, perfunctory nod before straightening. Enjoy the view while it lasts, querida. Then she was gone, leaving the faint scent of expensive roses in the air. My grandmother frowned. Who was that woman? No one important, I said quickly, pressing her hand. But inside, the words twisted. No one important, but important enough to walk into our world like she belonged. Important enough to remind me I was an outsider in mine. I sat there long after my grandmother drifted back to sleep, staring at the door Camilla had walked through. And I realized something I hadn't admitted even to myself. Part of me wanted Bernardo to choose me. Not because of obligation, not because of rules, but because of me. And that thought scared me more than Camilla ever could.
The party was another transaction disguised as celebration. Crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes, music played by men who never looked up from their instruments. Deals happened between laughs, threats behind clinks of glass. I hated these rooms. But appearances mattered, so I brought Laura. She wore the dress my father's tailor had chosen, black silk, cut to flatter without apology. When she stepped into the ballroom, conversation paused. Men noticed. Women sharpened. My hand tightened at her back before I could stop myself. She walked beside me with her chin high, that stubborn tilt I was learning to recognize. She wasn't flaunting, but she wasn't shrinking either. She didn't belong here, yet she carried herself as if she dared anyone to say so. The sight stirred something inside me I wasn't ready to name. Introductions blurred. Names, titles, fake smiles. Laura stayed quiet, polite. But when I glanced at her, I caught the flicker of fire in her green eyes. She was enduring, not enjoying. She hated these people as much as I did. Then Vitor appeared. He had always been too familiar, too careless with boundaries. We'd grown up together, shared secrets but he liked to test limits. And tonight, he tested mine. Laura, isn't it? He said warmly, bowing slightly over her hand. She smiled, small but genuine, more than she ever offered me. I watched him lead her toward the corner of the room, away from the crowd. She laughed at something he said, soft, unguarded. The sound cut through me, sharper than any blade. I crossed the floor before I knew I was moving, my jaw clenched, my pulse loud in my ears. People noticed. Of course they did, but I didn't care. Enjoying yourself? I asked, stepping between them. My voice was calm, but the edge was steel. Laura blinked at me, startled by the heat in my tone. Vitor raised his brows, smirk tugging at his mouth. Relax, Bernardo. We're just talking. Find someone else to talk to. Silence crackled. The orchestra played on, but the notes felt distant. Vitor's smirk faltered when he saw I wasn't bluffing. With a shrug, he lifted his glass and drifted away, leaving Laura and me in the corner under too many watching eyes. I leaned down, close enough that my words brushed her ear. Stay by my side. She stiffened, fire flashing in her. Am I your wife? My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her she was both, that she was more, but the only words that came were raw and possessive. You're mine. She pulled back, searching my face as though trying to understand which part of me spoke, the man or the monster. Before she could answer, I placed my hand firmly at her waist and steered her back into the crowd, forcing the evening to continue as if nothing had broken inside me, but something had. Because for the first time, I realized I couldn't stand the thought of her laughter belonging to anyone else.
The ballroom blurred by the time we left. Too many glasses of champagne had loosened my tongue, dulled the sharp edge of fear. For once, I wasn't the poor girl dragged into a bargain. I was someone else, someone who could laugh, someone who could pretend this dress belonged to me. Until the car door closed and the night air pressed sobriety back into my skull. Bernardo sat beside me, rigid, silent, his profile carved from stone, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the city rushing past the tinted glass. I wanted to taunt him, to shatter that mask. Instead, my stomach twisted, hot and sour. By the time we reached the mansion, I was dizzy. My heels caught on the marble step and I stumbled. He caught me before I fell, his grip steady, surprising, careful, he muttered, guiding me inside. I'm fine, I slurred. The words betrayed me. I wasn't fine at all. He didn't let go until we reached my room. The light made me wince. I pressed a hand to my mouth, but it was too late. The nausea surged, sharp and humiliating. I doubled over, and the elegant silk of his jacket paid the price. Mortification hit harder than the alcohol. I'm sorry, I stammered, eyes blurring. I braced for anger, for cruelty, but none came. Bernardo exhaled slowly, steadying me with one arm. Don't apologize. His voice was quiet, stripped of the authority he usually wore like armor. He led me to the bathroom, knelt beside me as I clung to the cold porcelain. When the worst passed, he dampened a cloth and pressed it to my forehead, with a gentleness that undid me. No sharp orders, no threats, just silence and patience. When he finally helped me back to bed, my body was heavy, my eyelids dragging. He removed my ruined dress with careful efficiency, covering me with a fresh shirt that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. His shirt. As he pulled the blanket over me, I whispered through the haze, "Why are you being kind?" He froze, his hand lingering at the edge of the quilt. His eyes searched mine, dark and unreadable. For a second, I thought he might answer, but then he straightened, retreating into himself. "Sleep, Laura." I wanted to argue, to demand honesty. Instead, the exhaustion swallowed me whole. The last thing I felt was the brush of his fingers against my hair, so light I almost thought I imagined it. And in the blur before sleep, one thought cut through the fog. The monster wasn't only a monster, and that terrified me more than anything.
I didn't sleep. Her voice, thick with exhaustion, blurred by alcohol, kept replaying in my head. Why are you being kind? I should have dismissed it. I should have reminded myself she wasn't here for kindness. She was here because my father demanded it, because the family required an heir, because her grandmother's failing lungs could be bought with my name. But I couldn't shake the look in her eyes when she said it. Fragile, confused, searching. From the study, I poured whiskey and let it burn down my throat. Outside, the city pulsed, 1,000 lives moving under my control, yet outside my reach. I used to believe control was strength. Now I wasn't so sure. Laura had been a stranger when she walked into that chapel. A stranger in a plain dress with green eyes that didn't know how to lower themselves the way everyone else's did. My father thought desperation would make her docile. But I'd seen it. That flicker of defiance. The will she tried to hide. She hadn't bent. She'd endured. And endurance was more dangerous than rebellion. I remembered the way her fingers had curled around the edge of the sink tonight, knuckles white, body shaking. She hadn't begged me. She hadn't begged me for anything. She had simply endured. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my jaw. My father's rules echoed in my skull. Tradition is armor. Obedience is survival. But armor was heavy. And obedience tasted like ash. I told myself I didn't care if she hated me. In fact, I wanted her to. Hate built walls, and walls kept things clean. Desire was a liability. Affection was poison. Love was the sharpest blade of all. And yet, in the quiet hours of night, the thought of her asleep in my shirt twisted something deep inside me. I thought of Camilla, the woman who knew the rules, who played the role without complaint. With her, everything had been simple, empty, predictable. Laura was none of those things. And that was the problem. I slammed the glass onto the desk hard enough to splinter it, amber liquid bleeding across papers I didn't bother to save. No more. I wouldn't be weak. She was a contract, a vessel, a name beside mine to satisfy my father's paranoia. But when dawn broke and I heard her light footsteps in the corridor, I found myself listening for them. And in that small betrayal of my own resolve, I realized something I didn't dare admit aloud. I was already losing.
The air in the mansion pressed down on me like stone. Every hallway echoed with silence. Every door felt locked even when it wasn't. I needed to breathe. I needed to see someone who remembered me before all this. So I called Pedro, just once, just to hear his voice. He answered on the first ring. "Laura." The way he said my name, it wasn't an order, it wasn't a verdict, it was a plea. "I can't stay long," I whispered, "but I need to see you." We agreed on the cafe near the old train station, the one that smelled of burnt coffee and warm bread. I told myself I would explain, make him understand, maybe even say goodbye properly. I slipped out in the afternoon, wrapped in a coat, heart pounding against my ribs. For a few minutes I felt almost free, but freedom was an illusion. The cafe's bell jingled softly when I pushed the door. Pedro was already there, waiting. He stood so fast the chair scraped the floor. His eyes widened when he saw me, raw with hope and pain. "Laura," he breathed. "I was afraid you'd—" "Pedro, listen," I cut in, throat tight. "I can't undo what's happened. My grandmother needs—" "You don't belong with him," Pedro snapped, his voice trembling. "You belong with me. We can leave. Tonight. We'll disappear." I shook my head, tears pricking hot. "You don't understand. There's no escaping men like him. There's no escaping his father." Before he could argue, the cafe door swung open. The sound was ordinary, but the shift in the air wasn't. I knew before I looked. Bernardo. He filled the space with nothing but his presence. Dark suit, eyes burning like coals. Conversation at the tables faltered. He didn't spare anyone a glance. Just me. My stomach dropped. Pedro stiffened. "You followed her?" Bernardo's gaze cut to him, cold and sharp. "I protect what's mine." I rose quickly, placing myself between them. Please, don't. Bernardo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We're leaving. Pedro stepped forward, fists clenched. She doesn't belong to you. The air around us cracked like ice. My pulse roared. Before it could shatter into violence, I turned to Pedro, voice breaking. Stop, please. I can't let you get hurt. His eyes begged me not to walk away, but I couldn't hold them. I reached for my coat and followed Bernardo out into the street, my legs trembling. The car ride home was silent, the kind of silence that screams. I felt the weight of his fury, coiled and waiting. Inside the mansion, he didn't wait. He slammed the door behind us, spinning toward me, eyes blazing. What were you thinking? His voice shook, not with volume, but with restraint. Meeting another man behind my back? I needed to talk to him. I snapped, my own anger rising to meet his. You don't control every breath I take. His hand hit the wall beside my head, caging me in. You are my wife, and you will not humiliate me. I should have been afraid. Maybe I was, but fury burned hotter than fear. Then stop treating me like a prisoner if you want me to act like a wife. We were too close, our breaths colliding. His eyes dropped to my mouth for the briefest moment, and the world tilted. Laura, he growled, my name torn from him like a confession. And then he kissed me. It wasn't soft, it wasn't gentle, it was fire, violent and hungry, every unspoken word crashing between our lips. I pushed against his chest but didn't pull away. My own anger bled into the kiss, sharp and desperate. When he finally broke it, his forehead rested against mine, his breath uneven. You drive me insane. I swallowed hard, trembling, heart torn between terror and something far more dangerous. Good. Because in that moment, I realized neither of us had control anymore.
My lips still burned with the taste of her. I'd meant to teach her a lesson, to remind her of the rules. Instead, I'd broken every one of them. Never touch unless I allow it. Never blur the lines. Yet I had crushed my mouth against hers like a starving man, and worse, she had kissed me back. Now the memory haunted me. The way she trembled, not in fear, but in fury. The way she met me with the same hunger I couldn't control. I poured another glass of whiskey, but it didn't wash her from me. Nothing could. When I closed my eyes, I saw her pressed against the wall, her green eyes blazing, daring me to lose control. When I opened them, I saw the city stretching beyond the windows, a kingdom I was supposed to command. But all I felt was love was not for men like I had been raised on duty, on blood oaths, and contracts sealed with silence. Women in my world were ornaments or weapons, never partner. My father had reminded me of that since childhood. Desire is distraction. Affection is liability. Love is betrayal. So why did the sound of her laugh at that cafe still echo in my skull? Why did the thought of her slipping out to meet another man make my chest feel like it was caving in? I gripped the glass harder until it cracked, amber spilling over my knuckles. Pain flared sharp. I welcomed it. At least pain was familiar. A knock came at the door. I didn't answer, but the handle turned and Laura. She stepped into the study, cautious but unafraid, wrapped in one of the silk robes the servants had left. Her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders in waves. She looked nothing like the wife of a mafia. She looked like temptation carved into defiance. You shouldn't walk in here, I said, voice harsher than intended. You said never to enter your room, she replied softly. This isn't your room. The retort should have angered me. Instead, it dragged a reluctant smile to the corner of my mouth. She saw it, and her eyes flickered, startled. She hesitated, then stepped closer, her gaze fixed on my bleeding hand. Without asking, she took the hand in hers and reached for the cloth on my desk. Her touch was light, precise. I should have pulled away. I didn't. You'll scar if you don't clean it properly, she murmured. Her words dragged me somewhere I hadn't been in years. White halls, sterile gloves, a scalpel steady in my grip. A different life, the one I'd abandoned. You sound like a doctor, I muttered. Her eyes lifted to mine. And you sound like someone who used to be one. The silence between us thickened. She didn't know the truth. How close she was to cutting open the wound I'd buried. I pulled my hand free, standing abruptly. Enough. Her lips parted, anger flashing. You can't keep shutting me out. Not after what you did tonight. I stepped closer, crowding the space until her back nearly touched the desk. And what did I do, Laura? Her breath hitched. She didn't answer with words. Her eyes fell to my mouth, just for a heartbeat. It was all I needed to know. I tore myself back before I lost everything again. Go to bed. She stared at me, furious, confused, vulnerable. Then she turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind her. I pressed my fists against the desk, chest heaving. I was supposed to keep her at arm's length. Instead, I was drowning in her. And for the first time, I admitted it in the silence of my own thoughts. I was falling in love with my wife.
The nausea came first. At dawn, before the house had fully woken, I found myself bent over the sink, gripping the porcelain until my knuckles turned white. I told myself it was stress, the aftertaste of too many sleepless nights. But deep down, I already knew. 2 weeks late. The numbers didn't lie, even if I wanted them to. I bought the test in secret, smuggled back in a paper bag between loaves of bread the cook never questioned. I took it in the bathroom, the marble floors freezing under my bare feet, my heart pounding louder than the ticking clock. 2 lines, clear, final, pregnant. For a moment, the world tilted. The rules, the contract, my grandmother's soft smile in her hospital bed, everything blurred. A baby meant permanence. A baby meant I was tied to this house, to this man, to this life of shadows and power, in a way I could never undo. I pressed a hand to my stomach, trembling. I didn't choose this. And yet, part of me whispered, no, screamed, that I would protect this child, no matter the cost. When I finally stepped out, Bernardo was waiting in the corridor. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes narrowing as he studied me. You're pale, he said. What's wrong? I tried to move past him. Nothing. He blocked my path with a single step. Don't lie to me. The words tangled in my throat. I wanted to keep it secret, just for a little while, to breathe without his gaze pinning me down. But his eyes, dark, unyielding, dragged the truth out of me. I'm pregnant. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Bernardo didn't move at first. He just stared, as though he hadn't heard me correctly. Then, slowly, he pushed off the wall and came closer. Close enough that the air thickened. Say it again. I swallowed. I'm pregnant. You're going to be a father. Something flickered across his face. Shock, disbelief, then something softer I couldn't name. His hand lifted, hesitated, then dropped again before touching me. Are you all right? His voice was low, almost careful. The question startled me more than anything. I'd expected anger, indifference, maybe cold calculation. Not this. I'm fine, I whispered, though my knees felt weak. Bernardo exhaled slowly, running a hand over his jaw. You need a doctor. Regular checkups? No stress. I'll arrange it. The sudden gentleness unsettled me more than his cruelty ever had. I crossed my arms over my stomach, guarding the tiny life inside. Don't think this changes anything between us. His gaze locked on mine. It changes everything. He said it like a vow, not a threat. And for the first time, I didn't know whether to feel safer or more trapped.
Fatherhood was never supposed to be mine. Not this way. Not through a contract. Not with a woman my father had chosen like a pawn. And yet when Laura said the words, I'm pregnant, something cracked open inside me. For days after, I couldn't shake the thought. Her hand unconsciously brushing her stomach, the faint pallor in her cheeks, the way she avoided my eyes, as if the weight of this life pressed harder on her than on, and maybe it did. I found myself watching her more closely, not with suspicion this time, but with a strange protectiveness. When she walked the gardens, I instructed the guards to keep a discreet distance. When she ate, I told the kitchen to prepare healthier meals, lighter, fresher. She noticed the change. She didn't thank me, but she noticed. Camilla noticed too. She came to me one, slipping past the guards with the ease of someone who thought the rules never applied to her. Dressed in red silk, she leaned against my desk as if the years hadn't passed, as if she still had the right to claim me. So it's true, she said, lips curling. You married the little nobody, and now she carries your heir. Her tone dripped venom. I should have ignored it. Instead, I felt a sharp flash of anger, not at her words, but at the disdain in her eyes when she said Laura. Leave, I ordered. She blinked, taken aback. Bernardo, I said leave. My voice was flat, final. For the first time, she faltered. The realization settled between us like broken glass. Whatever we had once been was over. She left without another word. When the door shut, I exhaled, pressing my palms against the desk. I'd chosen a side. My father would see it as weakness, Camilla as betrayal. But it didn't matter. Later that night, Vitor came by. He'd been drinking, as usual, but his words cut with sobering precision. You could have been a doctor, he muttered, sinking into my armchair. You still could be. Instead, you're here playing heir, just like your father wanted. I didn't answer. He smirked, swirling his glass. Funny, isn't it? You walked away from saving lives. Now you've got one growing under your roof. A child that might force you to remember who you were. I turned away, but his words lodged deep. When I finally went upstairs, I passed Laura's door. Light still glowed faintly beneath the crack. I paused, hand half lifted to knock, then let it fall. Instead, I whispered into the corridor, words meant for no one, and her, at the same time. I will protect you, both of you. Then I walked back to my room, more restless than ever. haunted by the truth Veeder had unearthed. The woman my father had chosen for me wasn't just carrying my heir. She was carrying the only part of me I wanted to save.
The first pain came like a knife twisting low in my belly. Sharp, sudden. I froze at the vanity table, brush slipping from my fingers. A second pain followed, heavier, crueler. When I rose, warmth spread down my legs. I looked down and saw the stain, red blooming against pale silk. For a moment, the world collapsed. No air, no sound, only the crushing certainty. I'm losing the baby. I stumbled into the corridor, clutching the wall, voice breaking. Help! A maid appeared, eyes wide, rushing to support me. But before she could call anyone else, Bernardo was already there, his steps pounding against the marble, his face carved in panic I had never seen before. Laura, he breathed, catching me before my knees gave out. His hands, always so controlled, so precise, shook as he lifted me into his arms. Blood stained his shirt, but he didn't notice. Stay with me, he ordered, voice hoarse, more plea than command. Do you hear me? Stay awake. The car ride blurred, his arm around me, his breath harsh in my ear, his chest trembling where my head rested. At the hospital, doors flew open, nurses swarmed, machines hummed. He didn't let go until a doctor forced him to. I lay on the gurney, eyes fluttering, and for the first time since our wedding, I saw Bernardo stripped of his armor. His face pale, jaw clenched, terror leaking through every line. Hours passed. I floated in and out, drowning in white light and whispered voices. When I finally woke, my grandmother's lullaby hummed in my ears, except it wasn't her voice. It was his. Low, rough, fractured. I blinked. He sat beside me, elbows on his knees, head bowed into his hands. When he lifted it, his eyes were red, his expression raw. The baby's safe, he said quickly, as if clinging to the words himself. They stopped the bleeding. But you need rest. No stress. No arguments. His voice cracked on the last word. I swallowed, throat tight. I thought I lost it. His hand found mine, not commanding, not forcing, just holding. So did I. I stared at him, at the man who had imposed rules, who had caged me with vows, now undone by fear of losing something we hadn't even met yet. For the first time, his walls had crumbled, and against my will, my heart ached for him.
The house was too still when I returned from the hospital. Guards lined the hall as always, but their eyes dropped, their silence heavier than stone. I climbed the stairs to my father's study with a weight in my chest I hadn't felt in years. He was waiting. He always was. Don Alberto sat behind his desk, the room dim except for the amber glow of a single lamp. Papers spread before him like battle plans. When I entered, he didn't greet. He simply poured 2 glasses of brandy, sliding one toward the empty chair. I don't want it, I said. You'll need it, he replied. Something in his tone made me sit. The brandy stayed untouched. You've changed, he observed, studying me like an opponent across a chessboard. That girl has done it. I see it in your eyes. The softness, the hesitation. I clenched my fists. Laura is carrying my child. If that's what you call weakness, so be it. He leaned back, a shadow of a smile curving his mouth. No, feel. What I call weakness is truth. And there's one you need to hear. I didn't move, didn't blink. It concerns her father. My breath stilled. You told me he died in an accident, I said slowly. I did, but it wasn't fate. It was me. The words landed like a gunshot in my chest. My father's eyes didn't wait. Her father was a problem. He was honest. Too honest. He stood in the way of business I could not allow to fail. One night, a decision had to be made. I made it. I gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. You're saying you killed him. I gave the order, he corrected calmly. It was quick, clean, necessary. And afterward, I made certain the girl and her grandmother were left alone. I even offered her this arrangement to make amends, though she doesn't know the reason. Amends. The word was poison. I rose, heat flooding my... You tied her to me, forced her into this marriage, because of your guilt. He didn't flinch. Because of my responsibility. You think love will save you? It won't. Blood and duty are the only truths in this world. I wanted to strike him. For the first time in my life, the urge was nearly uncontrollable, but I didn't. Violence wouldn't erase his words. Violence wouldn't change the fact that my wife, the woman carrying my child, was bound to me by a chain of blood my father had spilled. You'll never tell her, he said quietly, reading the storm in my face. If you do, you'll lose her, and you'll lose the heir she carries. Do you understand? I turned toward the door, rage burning through me. I understand one thing, he lifted a brow, and that is, that you've already lost me. I left before I destroyed the room. The brandy glass sat untouched, amber catching the lamplight like liquid fire.
The house carried secrets in its walls. You could feel them if you pressed your ear against the cold marble. If you listened to the servants' hurried steps, if you watched the way Bernardo's jaw tightened when his father's name was spoken, I noticed it first in whispers, a guard muttering about debts long paid in blood, a nurse at the hospital lowering her voice when she recognized my surname, pieces that didn't fit, until they did. That night, I found Bernardo in his study. Papers sprawled across the desk, but he wasn't reading them. He was staring at nothing, shoulders tense, a storm brewing behind his eyes. "Tell me the truth," I said. His head lifted, startled by the steel in my voice. "About what?" "My father." The words cut my throat on their way out. "People talk. They don't say much, but they say enough. What happened to him?" Silence, heavy, suffocating. Bernardo rose slowly, pushing the chair back. "Laura, this isn't—" "Don't lie to me," I snapped. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. "Not about this. Did your family— Was it your father?" His jaw clenched, muscles shifting as though he could hold the truth inside by sheer force. Then his eyes met mine, and the answer was there before he spoke. "Yes," he said finally, voice raw. "It was my father. He gave the order." The room tilted. My knees threatened to give out, but rage kept me standing. "And you knew. You've known. All this time, while I— My voice broke, tears spilling hot and merciless. He stepped toward me, hand outstretched. "I found out only recently. I didn't know when we— Don't!" I stumbled back, breath ragged. "Don't touch me." The look on his face, like a man gutted, should have softened me. It didn't. "You let me believe this marriage was only about power, about a child, but all along it was about covering his sins." My voice shook with fury. "Do you understand what you've done? You tied me to the family that destroyed mine." Bernardo's eyes burned, but not with anger, with anguish. "I didn't choose this, Laura. I never wanted— Neither did I hissed. "But here we are, and now I know what your vows are worth." The silence stretched, unbearable. My tears fell freely, my body shaking. He didn't move, as if afraid that a single step would break us completely. Finally, I whispered the only truth I had left. "I can't stay here. Not with you." His face shattered. "Laura—" But I turned away, my footsteps echoing as I left the study, leaving him with the wreckage of the truth. That night, I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, one hand curled over the life growing inside me. For the first time since all this began, I didn't cry for myself. I cried for the child who would inherit a legacy built on blood.
The divorce papers sat on my desk for 2 days before I touched them. Heavy sheets of white, embossed with gold seals, the kind of documents that were meant to look like salvation but smelled like chain. My father's handwriting marked the last page, a signature too steady for the weight it. He had prepared everything: a clean exit for Laura, a legal ending that would protect the family name and erase the scandal before it could take root. "Sign them," Don Alberto had said. His voice had been calm, almost merciful. "Let her go. The child will still be ours. That is what matters." But he was wrong. The child wasn't ours. The child was mine, Laura's. Something untainted, something fragile, something real in a life where everything else had been performance and duty. Still, I signed. My name scrawled across the line like a wound, because I knew if I didn't, my father would find another, crueler, colder, and Laura deserved freedom, even if it broke me. When the pen fell from my hand, I stared at the signature, a hollow ache spreading through my chest. She would leave me, and I would let her, but I would not let my father win. That night, I called Vitor. We met in the basement of a clinic I'd once worked in, years ago, before medicine had been stripped from me. The smell of disinfectant still clung to the walls, memories echoing with every step. "You're serious about this?" Vitor asked, leaning against the counter, glass of cheap whiskey and— "Yes." My voice was steel. "No more shipments. No more laundering. I'll invest in the hospital, expand it, make it untouchable. If my father wants to bury me for it, let him try." Vitor chuckled, but his eyes were be a target. "More enemies than friends in the— "I've had enemies since the day I took his," I said. "But Laura, our child, they won't grow in the shadow of blood, not if I can help it." For a long moment he studied me, then he nodded. "All right, I'll back you." We clinked glasses, the sound sharp in the quiet. When I returned to the mansion, the corridors felt colder. Laura's room was empty. She had already begun moving her things. My father's guards avoided my eyes, as though they sensed the fracture widening. I stood outside her door for a long time, my hand raised, but I didn't knock. What right did I have, after signing her freedom away? Instead, I whispered to the silence, "I'll fix this. I'll fix us, even if it takes the rest of my life." The words were a vow, heavy as iron, soft as prayer, and though the house around me still reeked of my father's power, I knew one truth he could never erase. I had chosen a different war.
The new house was smaller, quieter, and safer, or at least that's what I told myself. No armed men at the gates, No marble corridors echoing with silence, just a modest home, sunlight through thin curtains, the scent of chamomile tea filling the air. Miguel's laughter used to fill the rooms. At first, his giggles made me believe I'd done the right thing, signing those papers, walking away from Bernardo's world. Here, my son could grow without shadows at every corner. But laughter fades quickly when a child is sick. It started with fevers that came and went, then long afternoons where his small body grew heavy in my arms. He tired too easily, breaths shallow, eyes too dim for a boy who should have been chasing butterflies in the yard. I told myself it was nothing, just childhood illnesses. But the truth gnawed at me every time his forehead burned under my lips. Doctors in the local clinic murmured about complications, something rare, something beyond their expertise. They recommended specialists in the city. The name of the hospital stung like ice when I heard it. The hospital Bernardo had funded, expanded, made his sanctuary after walking away from the family business. I tried to resist. Pride, fear, anger. They all screamed at me not to go back there, not to risk opening wounds that hadn't healed. But then Miguel coughed so hard his lips went blue, and every argument inside me collapsed. So here I was, pacing the pediatric ward of the gleaming hospital with Miguel clinging weakly to my shoulder, his breath shallow against my neck. The nurses moved quickly, efficiently, ushering us into a private room. Machines beeped. White sheets rustled. I stood by the bed, heartbreaking as they fitted an IV into his tiny arm. He didn't cry. He was too tired even for that. "Mommy?" His voice was faint, eyes fluttering. "I'm here, meu amor," I whispered, stroking his hair. "I'm not going anywhere." But I knew someone else would come. He always did, because this was his hospital. And if fate was cruel enough to bring me here, it would be cruel enough to place him in my path again. I pressed a kiss to Miguel's forehead, tears slipping down my cheeks. I had chosen freedom, but freedom had brought me back to the one place I swore I'd never return. And somewhere down these pristine halls, Bernardo was waiting.
Hospitals used to feel like temples to me, sacred, orderly, built for saving lives. After years under my father's shadow, I tried to reclaim that meaning, to carve something clean out of all the blood. This hospital was supposed to be my redemption, but nothing could have prepared me for seeing her. I'd been reviewing reports in the administrative wing when I caught the nurses whisper, "New admission, 5-year-old boy, rare autoimmune surname matched with her file." My pulse stopped. My feet moved before my mind did, and there she was. Laura sat by the child's bed, her back straight, though exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. Her hair fell loose around her face. No jewels, no silk, just the raw, unpolished beauty I remembered too well. One hand smoothed the boy's hair, the other gripping his tiny fingers as if sheer will could anchor him to this world. "Miguel, my son." The monitors beeped softly. His small chest rose and fell with effort. He had my dark lashes, her eyes. My throat closed at the sight. Laura noticed me then. Her body stiffened, every muscle ready for a fight. For a moment, I almost turned back, almost spared her the pain of my presence. But then Miguel stirred, and his gaze, weak, unfocused, lifted to me. "Mommy? Who's that?" His voice was barely a thread. Laura's lips trembled. She didn't answer. Couldn't. I stepped forward, my hands curling into fists to hide their shake. "I'm your father," I said quietly, "and I'm not going anywhere." The words broke something in. Laura's eyes burned, not with hatred this time, but with a grief I recognized. She wanted to keep me out, but the truth was already between us, undeniable as the boy breathing through tubes and wires. I looked at her then, really looked. She was thinner, worn by battles I hadn't been there to fight. She'd raised him alone, carried him alone, while I drowned in my war against my father. And yet, here she was, still standing, still fierce. "I'll make sure he gets the best," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Every doctor, every resource, whatever it takes." Her lips parted, anger and fear colliding. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I've broken enough," I admit. My gaze dropped to Miguel, fragile and perfect in the... Not this. Never this. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft beeping of the monitor. Then, finally, Laura's hand loosened around our son's, just enough for mine to join her. 3 hands, bound by blood and in that sterile room, with machines humming like prayers, I knew one truth with absolute clarity. I would burn the world before I let either of them go again.
The day Miguel opened his eyes without machines hissing around him, I broke. The doctors said the surgery had gone well, that his little body had fought harder than they expected. But it wasn't their words that mattered. It was the sound of his laugh, faint but real, when I kissed his cheek and whispered that he was safe. Safe. For the first time in years, the word didn't feel like a lie. I sat beside his bed, watching him sleep, my hand curled around his. The shadows under his eyes were fading, his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of peace. Every part of me ached with relief, and then I felt it, the weight of a gaze. Bernardo stood in the doorway. He didn't speak, didn't dare move closer, as though he might break the fragile miracle unfolding before us. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie gone, dark circles beneath his eyes. He had been here every night, I knew. Quiet in the corners, speaking to the doctors, refusing to leave until Miguel was stable. Our eyes met. So much unsaid stretched between us. Pain, anger, betrayal. But also something else. Something alive, fragile, undeniable. I rose slowly, careful not to wake Miguel, and walked into the hallway. Bernardo followed, silent, his hands flexing at his sides. When the door closed behind us, he finally spoke. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said, voice low and raw, "but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." I swallowed hard. "You can't erase the past." "No," he admitted, "but I can choose differently now. For him. For you." His eyes burned into mine. "Only if you let me." For weeks I had fought against this moment, against the part of me that still wanted him, even after all the lies, all the blood. But here, with our son alive and breathing because of him, I couldn't keep denying it. He had changed. Or maybe he was finally becoming the man he'd once tried to be. I exhaled, tears spilling freely. "I don't want chains, Bernardo. Not contracts. If I stay, it's because I choose it. Do you understand?" His jaw tightened, his voice steady but trembling at the edges. "Then choose me, and I'll never let you regret it." For the first time, I believed him. I stepped forward, closing the space between us. His hand found mine, warm, certain. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't afraid of what it meant. Because this time, it wasn't duty. It wasn't survival. It was love.
The house was quiet in a way that didn't suffocate. No guards pacing the halls. No whispers of betrayal hiding behind closed doors. Just the crackle of a fire, the hum of wind outside, the faint sound of Laura laughing softly as Miguel begged for one more bedtime story. I stood in the doorway watching them. She sat on the rug, hair tumbling over her shoulders. Miguel curled in her lap, clutching a worn picture book. His eyelids were heavy, but he clung to her voice like it was the only thing keeping the world from falling apart, and maybe it was. When he finally drifted off, she carried him to bed, kissed his forehead, and closed the door with infinite care. Then she turned to me. Our eyes met in the hallway, and for once, there was no distance between us. This was the life I never thought I'd have, the one my father swore was weakness. But standing here, I knew he'd been wrong. Power wasn't built from fear. It was this. The warmth of her hand slipping into mine. The quiet certainty that I belonged not to an empire but to them. I'd walked away from the family business. Burned bridges my father thought eternal. Some enemies still watched from the shadows, waiting for me to falter. Let them. I'd chosen my war, and it wasn't theirs any. It was this small, sacred world I'd protect. Later, when Laura and I finally lay together in the dark, Miguel's steady breathing drifting down the hallway, I pulled her against me and pressed my lips to her hair. "I used to think I was a weapon," I whispered, "that it was all I could ever be. But you gave me back the man I thought I'd buried." Her hand tightened over mine. We gave each other back. For a long time, we just breathed together, the quiet of the night folding around us like a promise. I'd loved her long before I could admit. I'd nearly lost her more than once. But now, with the past behind us and the future sleeping soundly in the next room, I understood something with absolute clarity. I would never let the darkness touch them again. Because Laura wasn't my contract. She wasn't my prisoner. She was my choice, my love, my salvation. And Miguel, our son, was proof that even in a world built on blood, something pure, the empire my father left behind, could crumble to dust. I didn't need it. I had everything right here.
The road twisted through hills painted in gold by the dying sun. From the back seat, I watched my grandmother's hands clutch the blanket on her lap. Fragile hands, thin as paper, that had carried me through every storm of my life. "Where are we going, meu amor?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with age but still warm. I looked at Bernardo, his eyes fixed on the horizon, a rare smile curving his lips. "Home," he said simply. When the car stopped, I understood. The house rose like a promise against the sky, stone and wood, surrounded by fields of wildflowers. Not a palace, not a prison, a sanctuary, a place where shadows could not follow. Miguel ran ahead, laughing, his little feet kicking up petals. His laughter echoed through the valley, brighter than any hymn. Bernardo stepped out and opened the door for my grandmother. He bent down, not the mafia heir, not the man of rules and steel, but simply a grandson welcoming the matriarch he had never had. "Donna Maria," he said, his voice reverent, "this is your home too." Tears welled in her eyes as he guided her gently, carefully to the veranda. She lowered herself into a rocking chair that faced the garden, her gaze following Miguel's running form, her smile breaking through years of pain. For the first time, she looked free. I sat at her feet, holding her hand. "Vo, we're safe now. All of us." Her fingers tightened around mine. "I knew, Laura," she whispered. "I knew one day you would find not only survival, but love." I turned toward Bernardo. He stood by the doorframe, watching us with eyes darker than twilight, but no longer heavy with sorrow. Instead, they carried something fragile, something I had fought so long to believe in: hope. He crossed the porch, knelt beside me, and pressed his forehead to my grandmother's hand. "I couldn't give you back what was taken," he murmured, voice breaking, "but I will spend my life giving you peace." Her hand trembled as she blessed him, her thumb brushing his temple. "Then you are already my grandson." The air shifted around us, the weight of years, of blood, of loss. It all dissolved in that single breath of forgiveness. As the night fell, the house filled with the smell of bread, the sound of Miguel's laughter, and the steady rhythm of Dona Maria's rocking chair. And I realized something with burning clarity. The story hadn't been about chains, or contracts, or debts of blood. It had been about becoming family, about a man who laid down his crown of shadows, about a woman who traded her suffering for love, about a child whose laughter healed generations, about an old soul who could finally rest, not in death, but in peace among her own. That night, as the stars unveiled themselves above the valley, I whispered a silent vow. No empire, no past, no shadow will ever claim us again. This is where love reigns. This is where we live. This is where we stay.
The house was silent, but my heart was a storm. Miguel slept peacefully, his dreams guarded by the warmth of his grandmother in the next room. The countryside around us breathed in stillness, the moon hanging like a silver lantern above the field. Everything was quiet, safe, untouched. But inside me, there was fire. Laura stood by the window of our bedroom, bathed in the thin fabric of her nightgown clung to her, the soft breeze lifting strands of her hair so they danced like threads of gold and copper. She was barefoot, delicate and wild at the same time, and when she turned to me, those green eyes pierced through the darkness, straight into my chest. I had lived with shadows all my life, but tonight, staring at her, I understood. I had never known true light until this moment. "Bernardo," she whispered, as if saying my name was a prayer. I went to her slowly, not like a man claiming, but like a man surrendering. My hands found her waist, trembling with need, and I kissed her deeply, hungry, desperate, as though every heartbeat depended on her breath. Her mouth opened under mine, soft gasps escaping, and I pulled her against me. She pressed her palms to my chest, feeling the wild rhythm of my heart. "You belong to me," I murmured against her lips. "But more than that, I belong to you." The kiss deepened, turning into a fire that consumed everything else. I lifted her, carried her to the bed, and laid her gently upon the sheets. The moon poured light over her skin, and I stopped just to look, her chest rising and falling, her lips parted, her eyes burning with desire and trust. I touched her slowly, reverently. My hands traced every line of her body as if memorizing scripture. Her sighs were soft at first, then sharper, more urgent, pulling me deeper into her. Her fingers tangled in my hair, her nails scraped lightly across my back, every touch pulling me closer, binding me. We moved together in a rhythm older than words, our breaths colliding, our whispers breaking the silence of the night. It wasn't only hunger, it was devotion. Every kiss, every touch said what my mouth could not. "You are my salvation, my forever." "Bernardo," she gasped, arching into me, her voice breaking into a plea and a promise. "Laura." I breathed against her skin, my lips on her throat, her shoulder, the hollow where her pulse raced beneath my mouth. "I will never let you go. I will never stop loving you." The world vanished. There was no mafia, no shadows, no blood, only her, only us. The fire built until it consumed us both. Our cries mingled, hers wild, mine raw, the sound of two souls colliding and finally surrendering completely. When the storm broke, I held her tightly, our bodies trembling, our hearts still racing as one. She lay against my chest, skin warm, breath uneven, my arms wrapped around her, possessive and protective, as if even sleep might try to steal her away. I kissed her hair, her temple, her lips once more, softer now, reverent. I thought love would weaken me, I confessed into the quiet, voice rough with truth. "But loving you, Laura, it's the only strength I have ever known." She lifted her eyes to mine, green flames shimmering with tears, and smiled the smile that healed every wound inside me. Outside, the fields whispered in the wind, and the stars crowned the night with silver. But the only heaven I needed was here, in her arms, in her body, in the way she looked at me as if I were already redeemed. And as I held her, I knew with a certainty sharper than any blade I would die for her, would kill for her, but most of all, I would live for her, forever. Thank you for walking with me until the very end. Your presence here means more than words can capture. Every time you leave a trace, a like, a comment, a share, it tells the world that this story deserves to be heard, and that truth fuels me, inspires me to keep writing with soul and surrender. If these tales speak to you, let me know. Even the smallest comment, a simple, "I'm here," warms my heart more than you imagine. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. It's free, and you can turn on the bell to receive each new chapter as it arrives. If you feel moved, share it. With friends, in your circles, with someone who needs a reminder that love, dark, fragile, relentless, still survives in a world so loud, so wounded. Your gesture may seem small, but it changes everything. Together, we can scatter sparks of love into the shadows. So thank you, not just for reading, but for being, and may you always, always feel welcome.